Urbanism, imperial architecture, how can architecture in urban form become part of the building of empire? And as Peter said, we're going to spend time in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey as well as Syria. But we're going to begin our journey right here with this wonderful tile or fragment of a tile that is in the collection of the Asian Art Museum next door. This tile is part of the kinds of ceramics produced in state kilns in the Ottoman Empire that are called Iznik ware or Iznik tiles. Iznik being the city where this official imperial factory or kilns for the production of this pottery were located. Iznik, of course, is the same city as ancient Nicaea. The fragment that I'm showing on the screen it was originally an architectural tile. It would have been used like this in an Ottoman building, a mosque, a public building, or a palace, or a luxurious home. It would have been used as wall revetment. Of course, the Iznik kilns also produced tableware, vases, mugs, etc., and there are several wonderful examples in the Asian Art Museum. Another object from the collection next door that I want to use as a point of entry into our story today is this interesting work on paper. So the way we see it now, it is a piece of paper on which this golden calligraphic flourish appears, but it has later been used for the writing of another kind of text. So we're in the presence of an object that was reused. But we're interested in right now in the original form or the original use of this piece of paper, which was the imperial monogram of an Ottoman Sultan, Sultan Suleyman the Magnificent, known in the West as the Magnificent and known within Ottoman Turkish historiography as the lawgiver. And we'll talk about him a little bit today. So here is another example of the calligraphic emblem of the Sultan. So this was a signature or an official monogram, an emblem, a cipher that would often appear on official documents that came from the imperial chancery. And the fragment that we have at the Asian Art Museum is an example of such a document that has later been repurposed for another kind of calligraphy. So the idea of the Ottoman tiles, their use in Ottoman architecture, and the personality of this great sultan and of his court are going to be the sort of guiding themes for our adventure through the Ottoman Empire today. So here is geographically speaking, the area that we are talking about. The Ottoman Empire began around 1300. The Ottoman state began around 1300 and was extinguished after the First World War in 1923. So in world history, it is the longest running single dynasty, the same biological family that was at the head of an empire for 700 years. So how is that possible? How can that continuity be ensured? And of course, to maintain this degree of power and authority over this enormous area, when the dynasty began in the early 14th century, it was a small principality in Asia Minor. By 1517, the early 16th century, where most of our discussion will take place, they are in control, the Ottomans are in control of most of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the Arab world today, and parts of North Africa. So a huge chunk of the world, a huge area that is unified by a bureaucracy, but also a vision through the arts of what the empire should look like, what the image of empire should be. So let's begin with the key moment, or one of the key moments in the evolution of the Ottoman polity and Ottoman art and architecture, which was 1453, that key date in world history, when Byzantine Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Sultanate. And of course, what we're seeing here is the broader area of the Bosphorus, including the peninsula that is ancient Constantinople and of course today's modern Istanbul. And here is another plan of Byzantine Istanbul that you probably can't see it, but it aims to show some of the main monuments. A conquest like this, 1453, is one of these momentous events in world history where all parties are transformed. Of course, through conquest, Constantinople became Istanbul, became the capital of the new Ottoman Empire, and eventually the fabric of the city itself was transformed. But the conquest of this the capital of the Holy Roman Empire also transformed the Ottoman polity and the Ottoman self-perception. Whereas previously, the Ottomans had been, or could be characterized as, an Islamic Asia Minor principality, whose importance was primarily regional, though they had greater ambitions. With the conquest of Constantinople, they become the inheritors of the Holy Roman Empire, and they see themselves in those terms. They see themselves as both leaders drawing upon the tradition of sovereignty within the Islamic tradition, but also as leaders who have inherited the mantle of the Holy Roman emperors, and so this is their history as well. And this dual heritage is something that is less emphasized when we talk about the Ottomans from the point of view of Islamic history. They saw themselves as the inheritors of this dual heritage. And to illustrate this point, here is a portrait, official portrait of Mehmet the Conqueror, the Sultan who conquered Constantinople, Istanbul in the mid-15th century. And he commissioned a portrait of himself from probably Gentile Bellini, the Venetian painter who we know spent time in Istanbul in those days. So this was one of a number of works of art, official portraits, a medal that he commissioned, Sultan Mehmet commissioned to have himself depicted in the European manner. And this was in addition to other kinds of depictions, such as manuscripts, and other kinds of portraits more in line with the Islamic pictorial tradition. So he is sponsoring arts in the Islamic tradition as well as the Renaissance Venetian or other Italianate tradition. So the arts are there to reflect this dual heritage that is so important to the self-image of the Ottoman polity in the 15th century in this period of transformation from a regional power to a major actor on the world stage. A power both in Asia and in Europe. And the city of their new capital, Istanbul, the Ottomans moved their capital to the newly conquered Constantinople, and the transformation of the city is a testament to their desire to turn their new capital city into a stage where their new perception of themselves could be enacted. Many wonderful scholars, including Cidem Cafesciolu and others, have written at length about the urban transformation from Byzantine Constantinople to Ottoman Istanbul, how the Ottomans went through a process of choosing to retain certain key urban areas and make them their own, or discard others. The Ottomans chose to maintain certain ceremonial axes to enact their own urban rituals that portrayed a sense of their perception of themselves to their urban population. To illustrate this process of transforming the landmarks of Istanbul, I want to turn to one of the icons of Istanbul, the Hagia Sophia. So, of course, we know that the Hagia Sophia, by the time the Ottomans conquered it, was already a 1,000-year-old building, a highly revered building. It was built as a church by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in the 6th century AD. It had suffered a number of structural issues. It had been repaired a number of times, so it's an active living building that is added to constantly in the Byzantine period. And when we are told in Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror's official histories that when he entered the city of Constantinople as a victor, as the conqueror of Istanbul, and as the inheritor now of the Holy Roman Empire, he and his closest military troops entered the Hagia Sophia and performed the Islamic prayer there, making that space their own. Not just as an act of appropriation, but as an act of transformation of themselves. This space that was the imperial church so closely associated with Byzantine imperial power, the shorthand for the glory of Byzantine artistic traditions, now is part of the Ottoman tradition. And the building itself is changed, minarets are added over time, but the building and the tradition that it represents also changes the Ottoman polity, the Sultan's self-perception, and the composition of the court. So it's a very dynamic and exchange, mutual transformation between city, architecture, the urban populace, and the Sultan and his court that takes place. So what are some of the architectural features of the Hagia Sophia? The great architectural ambition of this building was to create a large, uninterrupted, multi-story open space under a large dome. So in the 6th century AD, when this building is being built, that is the driving ambition, to create this transcendental space of uninterrupted void. And how do you cover that space with a dome, and how do you support that dome so that it does not collapse? So this is the engineering and architectural challenge. And the solution in the 6th century was to create a dome that sits on a ring of windows so that from the interior, the dome appears to float on a circle of light. The dome is supported by two half domes that are themselves supported by a series of buttresses. So from the exterior, if we go back to this image, from the exterior, the building is prominent on the skyline, but it is also clogged by all these buttresses and buttress-like supports, some of whom were original and some of whom were added later in an effort to prop the building up and in various repairs that were necessitated. So we see a profile from the exterior of this central dome, which is hemispherical. It is low, it is covered in lead, and it sits on this cascading or pyramidal formation of semi-domes, subsidiary half-domes, and buttresses. And some parts of the Hagia Sophia, which has now, in the 15th century, become the Hagia Sophia Mosque, the dynastic mosque of the Ottomans. Some of the exterior of this building looks rather ungainly, clogged and burdened by these buttresses. Be that as it may, this space, both in its exterior appearance and its interior appearance, becomes now the model for subsequent Ottoman mosque architecture. Whereas previously, remember, in the middle of the 15th century, the Ottomans have been a dynasty for about 200 years, 200 and change. They already had an architectural tradition, including the tradition of including ceramic tiles as part of the decoration, as part of architectural decoration. Now, part of the transformation is that the Hagia Sophia, the model of this interior uninterrupted space, and the exterior silhouette of the building that dominates the skyline with this dome, is going to become the model for Imperial Ottoman architects to emulate and to follow. And here is another view of the interior of this building. The Ottomans do intervene on the building itself to transform certain aspects of it. They add a prayer niche that indicates the proper direction, the Qibla direction, the direction towards Mecca, which is the direction one must face during prayer. They add certain kinds of furnishings, such as a pulpit, over time, a small pavilion, these calligraphic discs that are located here on to mark the corners of the building. Calligraphy is added in a number of places in the building, but certain aspects of the building are undesired. For example, the rich golden glass mosaic decorations that were part of the Byzantine Imperial architectural tradition are not going to be acceptable to the Ottomans. Not only because they contain figural imagery that depicts Christian topics, the Virgin and Child, donors who are Byzantine emperors. So it's not only the content of the depictions that is not going to be acceptable for the Ottomans as part of their mosque, but it is also, it appears to be, that the Ottomans objected to the medium of golden glass mosaic for reasons that are not entirely clear. And so how did the Ottomans treat the many surviving golden glass mosaics in the Hagia Sophia? Some of them they whitewashed, and so they were not destroyed, they were preserved but covered with a layer of paint. And in the cases of some icons, we know from various early modern sources, especially icons that were particularly powerful and that pilgrims wished to see and to commune with, they would add little shutters. And so they would not be visible, but certain times for certain pilgrims, Christian pilgrims, they would be open. So you could come in with permission and you could visit an icon, it would be open for you, and then it would be closed again. So it's a very flexible approach. And to illustrate my point that the Ottomans seem to dislike golden glass mosaics in general, they also, the Ottomans, also whitewashed golden glass mosaics that dated from the Islamic period in places such as the Great Mosque of Damascus. So what does this tell us? Maybe they had an objection to the medium of golden glass mosaic itself. But sadly, they don't discuss it in their own sources. But the overall point that I want to convey here is that the transformation of the dynastic church of the Byzantines into the now dynastic church associated with the Ottoman dynasty, the dynastic mosque associated with the Ottoman dynasty, is one that is an ongoing engagement and a very flexible approach to transformation. Some interventions are drastic and permanent, such as the addition of minarets, as you see here, with these pencil-shaped minarets that become a sign of an Ottoman mosque. Others are more removable, such as the calligraphic discs. Some interventions are covering things up, others covering up imagery, other kinds of imagery is removed. So it's a series of choices. The Ottoman intervention on this building is an ongoing series of choices in the interest of continually making this building their own. It was a living, dynamic relationship between the court and this ancient structure. So the importance of the historical resonance of this building was very important to the Ottomans. And we're going to see that the Ottomans will frequently revisit ancient important places, shrines, and locations, and transform them, manipulate them, add things, and transform things as part of a continued engagement with ancient sites of extreme importance from a religious, political, or aesthetic point of view. But at the same time, the Hagia Sophia now mosque also provides the impetus for a new direction in Ottoman architecture. So not only do they transform existing spaces, but they create new kinds of spaces. And in the gradual part of the gradual transformation of the city of Constantinople into Ottoman Istanbul is not only the reuse of important Byzantine spaces, but also the creation of major landmarks, architectural landmarks, and in the development of entire neighborhoods that place the new Ottoman stamp on the city. We are now at in the first half of the 16th century, so about 70 years or so after the conquest of Constantinople. And with the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, we're going to enter another stage in the consolidation of Ottoman power, additional territorial conquests, and what Professor Gülru Necibolu of Harvard University has aptly described as a process of creating a kanun or law for the state and a canon for the arts. So here is a representation of Sultan Suleyman by a European engraver. I have no idea if this is how he looked like or not. But the importance of this individual on Ottoman art and Ottoman history is very, very important. He was a very long-reigning sultan. He reigned from 1520 to 1566. And there are a number of evolutions over the course of his reign, but he is remembered for a very active, very forceful transformation of the Ottoman Empire towards greater centralization. After all, the 16th century around the Mediterranean is a period of where these centralized absolutist states are developing. The power of the state is asserted in a number of ways. And Suleyman the Magnificent asserts that power through his reform of the legal system of the empire, through what has been described as a new synthesis between Islamic legal thinking and a secular kanun or law. In addition, and perhaps as part of the same impulse to centralize and rationalize and order, was the creation over a period of years of a formula for the arts, a canon for the arts. And we see this very clearly in mosque architecture, and we will talk about that. I now want to turn very briefly to a manuscript before we talk about mosque architecture. And I want to talk about Ottoman self-perception and self-presentation around the middle of the 16th century. By now, middle of the 16th century, the Byzantine inheritance has been fully absorbed, and a new formula is being developed. So these images are from the Süleymanname, which is a luxury illustrated manuscript. It is an official history of the reign of Suleyman the Magnificent. It was completed, the manuscript was completed in 1558. It was part of a multi-volume history of the world, and this volume is the history of the reign of Suleyman. And it is preserved today at the Topkapı Palace Library in Istanbul. We're looking at facing pages, these double-page paintings from the early part of the manuscript that depict the accession of Suleyman. Of course, in a dynastic setting, changes in power are always fraught with tension. Especially in a dynasty like the Ottomans, part of their success, part of the reason why the single biological extended family was able to maintain control over a state for a period of centuries was that they evolved over time a formula for ensuring the succession of the ruling dynasty. And this was a very different formula from other royal families, contemporary royal families. By the 16th century, by the time Suleyman the Magnificent appears on the scene, they no longer, they do not have primogeniture. There's no reason for the first son to inherit the throne. Any son can inherit the throne, no daughters. And how that is decided, which son, is a matter of competition. In addition, because you have in Islamic law the idea of polygamy, any number of mothers could have sons and could be champions for them. By the time Suleyman the Magnificent comes into play, comes on the historical stage, the Ottomans have also evolved another formula for arranging their family organization. And this has been studied with great sensitivity by my friend Leslie Pierce, she's a former professor at Berkeley. She now teaches at NYU, and she just published a wonderful history, a popular history, beautifully written, of the wife of Sultan Suleyman, Hürrem, and it's entitled Empress of the East. It just came out. It was reviewed very positively in the New York Times. It's wonderful. It's like listening to Leslie tell you all of the wonderful stories that she has learned over her many years of studying archives, reading the letters that Suleyman wrote to his wife, all those forgotten papers. So highly recommended. And what Leslie's research has shown is that by this time, the Ottomans had evolved a highly individual formula for ensuring that the right person can succeed, and of course that the dynasty can endure. And so by this time they had abandoned for princes and for sovereigns the practice of marrying into royal families or noble families. Because if you married a Byzantine princess or the noble daughter of a powerful Muslim family, then the children of that wife will have an unfair advantage, because she will have the political power and clout of her natal family to bring with her. So instead, they encouraged concubinage with former slaves. So women who, because of the circumstances of their life, did not come with a powerful natal family that could then exert political clout or even control over the Ottoman dynasty itself. So the princes as well as the sultans were encouraged to produce a number of sons with a number of women, and then each of these mothers who had the same amount of power, which was did not come from a separate social network of their own or political network of their own, would then be the advocates for their sons, the princes. And when the time came, when the sultan dies, then any of these princes who hopefully have been training in the arts of statecraft will have an equal claim to the throne. Did this system breed intense competition between brothers? Yes. Did it have a cruel aspect? Yes. But it also ensured the continuity of the dynasty. Suleyman is one of the sultans who resists this practice, and at some point he, instead of choosing to maintain relationships with a number of concubines, he stays with one woman, Hürrem, the subject of Leslie Pierce's book. And they have a number of sons together, as well as daughters. One daughter, Mihrimah Sultan, becomes a major patron of the arts herself. And they are buried together. We will see their tombs. So that was a very unusual thing to do that prompted criticism. This is not, being under the thumb of one woman is not the right thing to do. So if you're intrigued by this story, these incredible personalities at this very interesting historical time, please read Leslie's book. She's much more eloquent than I am. Hürrem, of course, Suleyman's longtime companion and later wife, does not appear in the Süleymanname. Women of the royal family do not appear in the official history of the reign of the ruler, which doesn't mean that she was not central. So what is visible is not always what is the most important. But what we do see depicted as the official version, authorized version of the reign of Suleyman, is this crucial moment of accession. So what we see in these images is here Suleyman is seated, his courtiers are paying homage to him, everything is ordered. This was in, here's a closer view of that. In this, in the portico of the palace, the Sultan sits on a throne and he is attended by his viziers, greeted by a courtier in all humility, surrounded by Islamic scholars, other courtiers, and these men with the funny hats and the big sticks, the janissaries or military, the military that will enforce the ruler's power. So all is order in this image. Everything fits together. The trees are in the right place. Everything is balanced. This was, of course, not the way the accession happened. Suleyman had to rush back to the capital when his father died or when news of his father's death arrived, competition with brothers. And once he was the one who succeeded, then traditionally the Ottoman Sultan, the prince that prevailed over his brothers, then had to execute his brothers to eliminate any threat to his rule. So a very fraught moment of accession is presented here as everything is as it should be. Violence, uncertainty, tension is eliminated from the portrait of the empire. Another element that appears very strongly in the Suleymannameh is the recruitment of the individuals that made up the Ottoman polity, the people who ran the empire. And by the 16th century, the courtiers, the people who ran the empire, who formed members of the military, who ran or were the products of the palace school, were people who were either purchased as slaves or recruited through a special child levy, child tax, that the Ottomans levied from some, not all, of their provinces. The Suleymannameh, the official history of Suleiman, devotes a page to this practice. So what do we see here? So you see, of course, the text and image are always connected in manuscripts of this period. The text of the Suleymannameh is in verse. This is an official history in flowery verse that celebrates, in this instance, some of the most mundane, some of the most bureaucratic processes of running of the empire, which is collecting taxes and collecting the child levy. So the illustration shows us that we are in a village, we are in an Eastern European Christian village. We have members of the village community in apparent disarray. There is a man who appears to be a priest. There is a woman who appears to be upset. And here we have a series of boys all dressed in red with their little backpacks on their backs that they have just been given, led by a man in a big stick, a member of the Janissary Corps. These are the children that have been chosen, boys, that have been chosen as tribute children and will be taken away from their native village to the capital in order to be trained to become, according to their ability, military men, bureaucrats, etc. They will, of course, be converted to Islam when the time comes and given an education. Centrally in the image, we have bureaucrats. He is counting money, and he is writing in a ledger. 15 boys taken from this village, $1,500 collected from this municipality. So here we have in the medium of the luxury manuscript, in the pages where you often expect to find the great deeds of heroes like Rustem, killing demons, of great kings conquering territories. And alongside such expected episodes of conquest and demon slaying and heroic deeds and kings and rulers and holy men, we have lowly, simple bureaucrats running the empire. So the everyday running of the empire, the collection of money, the ledgers, which all still exist and have provided historians of the Ottoman Empire the raw matter for many, many dissertations, are depicted here in this manuscript. But there are some heroics here as well. It's not all bureaucrats and minutes of meetings and boring things. We also have conquest. Suleyman was not only a reformer of the Ottoman polity, but he was also an active conqueror who went on campaign with his troops. And he was one of the last sultans to do so. And so in the book, in this official history of his reign, we have depictions of his battles. But the way they are chosen to be depicted is very interesting. The enemies or the opponents to be conquered are often depicted. Here is the king of Hungary just before the Battle of Mohawks. And he is in his encampment. His tents are depicted very carefully. He is seated on his funny European chair. He is surrounded by his advisors and military men in their funny European armor. And since this is an audience well versed in Asian art, you will see that over here in the sky, we have a wonderful Chinese style cloud, which is just to remind you that Ottoman painting is part of the long tradition of Timurid painting, where elements of Chinese art are incorporated because they are so prized as a sign of the kind of sophistication that the Persianate painting associates with Chinese art and are always reproduced. So even though we are looking at a depiction of an event, a conquest that is taking place in the reign of Suleyman, we still have that reminder that this is part of a long history of painting that looks east as well as west. Another double page painting. So these two paintings are meant to be seen together. You open the page and this is what you see. They have a visual relationship. So this is the Siege of Belgrade. How is the Siege of Belgrade depicted? On one side, you have Suleiman's camp, and on the other side, you have Belgrade itself under siege. What is happening in Suleiman's camp? If I hadn't told you that this was the Siege of Belgrade, you would have thought that this is a genteel garden party. The encampment is perfect. The tents are in beautiful colors. There must have been exquisitely woven textiles. The trees are depicted with great loving care. Suleyman is seated without armor on a comfortable chair, surrounded by his advisors. All is calm, all is ordered. This is Ottoman order and Ottoman peace in the camp. They're not worried about the battle. People of Belgrade, on the other hand, everything is a mess. We're in the middle of the city. There's a fire. These poor people don't know what's going on. They're in total disarray. A ruler is standing in his funny European pants, but not really directing anything. People are asking, what are we going to do? What do we do next? This is not an image of order. This is not an image of calm. And the double-page paintings are meant to be seen together as Ottoman order, control, calm, beauty, balance, versus everybody else. Disarray, danger, fire, destruction. Thank goodness the Ottomans are going to conquer Belgrade and turn it in. This is official history. This is propaganda. This leaves out many things. So this is a representation. Let's not take it for the truth. So you're beginning to see where this new ethos of Ottoman order of self-perception is going. So this is how they represent themselves in paintings. How are they representing themselves in architecture? How are they remaking their cities as the stage upon which their sense of self is being played out? And so we begin, as we must, with the capital, the city of Istanbul. And here is a 1537 image of Istanbul created by Matrakçı Nasu, who was one of the child levies. He is a member of the military, a draftsman in the military, and he composes a series of very interesting manuscripts that are meant to be depictions of various parts of the city, and we will encounter him again. The main players in the crafting of Ottoman architecture are the Guild of Royal Architects. And the head of the Guild of Royal Architects, the chief imperial architect for most of Süleyman's reign and the reign of some of his successors, was a person named Sinan, also a product of the child levy system, who died in 1588. And Sinan has left a number of autobiographies or ghost-written autobiographies. These very interesting documents that scholars have studied and have very interesting things to say about. So in these purported or actual autobiographies, Sinan tells the story, a very triumphant story, of his journey as an architect. So this is an image from a manuscript from 1582 entitled the Surname, which depicts the festivities surrounding a festival. And part of the festivities was the parade of the guilds of Istanbul in front of the Sultan, who is here, and members of the court. And the parade is taking place in the Hippodrome, the old Hippodrome of ancient Constantinople, which has now been incorporated as part of a major open space in the Ottoman Istanbul called At Meydana, which means Hippodrome. So another continuity in the urban space and the uses of urban space between the Byzantine, ancient, and Ottoman periods. The Hippodrome is a space of openness, a space of display, and where these official ceremonies take place. So this Surname depicts the various urban guilds, including the Guild of Buffoons. My students love that one. But perhaps for our purposes, as wonderful as the buffoons are, the Guild of Architects is critical. And here they are, parading with the tools of their trade, and this instrument that they're carrying must be some kind of Ottoman-style T-square. And they're also carrying a papier-mâché model of an Ottoman-style mosque. A canon for the state, a canon for the arts. This is the canonical Ottoman mosque that has by now been refined to a perfect formula. What are the elements of this perfect canonical Ottoman mosque? we have the pencil-shaped minarets, so different from the minarets of other groups, other Islamic dynasties. 4 is usually associated with Imperial, with the Sultan's own mosques. The Ottoman-style mosques commissioned by others would have normally 1 minaret. You don't need more than 1. But if you're an Imperial mosque, you have 4. Some have 8. The building is preceded by a forecourt, and sometimes a tomb pavilion is also attached. The main building is multi-story and appears as a cascade of minarets and as a cascade of domes and semi-domes. The main space is under a single dome. So you can see how the Hagia Sophia is an ancestor of this canonical form, but it has been evolved, it has been crafted and refined to another formula. I opened this lecture to the Asian Art Museum, and I just want to acknowledge your generosity, David, and thank you for giving that beautiful work of art to this institution so that everyone can see it. Oh, okay. I met, during the break, I met David Menke, who is the person who donated the red tile, that beautiful bright red that I showed at the beginning, to the Asian Art Museum. And it's just such an honor to meet you, and thank you for your generosity and your family's generosity. So, if you have great works of art in your closet, please donate them to your nearest museum. So, in our last episode, we were talking about the evolving self-perception of the Ottomans and self-presentation. And so now I'll turn to the emblematic Ottoman Mosque, the summation of the canonical vision of Ottoman architecture and the masterpiece of the great imperial architect Sinan. And this is the Süleymaniye Mosque complex in Istanbul. We're looking at an 18th century engraving of it seen from the water. And you can easily see how the mosque is built to dominate the skyline of the city. So this is part of the ambition of the new Ottoman architecture. Just looking at it from the outside, we can see the effects, the inspiration from Hagia Sophia and from the Imperial Byzantine architectural tradition. The low hemispherical dome covered in lead. The large central dome supported by a series of half domes. The effect of a pyramid of domes, the overall effect. The pencil-shaped minaret soaring above the city. There's 4 of them. This is an imperial commission. In a photograph, we see both the Süleymaniye Mosque and a mosque by Rüstem Pasha, who was the son-in-law of Süleyman, and that has 1 minaret. But the formula is very similar. The dome has the same low hemispherical profile. The son-in-law's mosque is a more modest version of the Sultan's, but it maintains some of the key features of what makes an Ottoman mosque an Ottoman mosque. And by this time, middle of the 16th century, the Ottoman formula has evolved to create their own distinctive style, but also to distinguish themselves from other dynastic buildings, both the buildings of European rulers with whom Süleyman competed, but also to distinguish themselves from some of their non-friends who were other Islamic rulers, especially the Safavids, the rulers of the Iran and surrounding areas at the time. Another view of the Süleymaniye Mosque with a view of the Golden Horn. So this image gives you a sense of how much the mosque dominates the building around it. But the Süleymaniye complex is not only the mosque. The mosque is the centerpiece, but it is really an entire neighborhood built around a number of buildings that fulfill educational, charitable, and other functions. And collectively, they are meant to enhance not only the religious life of the city by offering a new mosque, but also enhance the importance of imperial functions. So here is a rendering of the Süleymaniye complex. And as it turns out, many of the registers, the bureaucratic registers used by the construction managers, if you will, of the Süleymaniye have survived. And so, exceptionally for a building project in the early modern period, we know amazing things. We know how much a stonemason got paid per day. We know where he was from. We know that you could take your day off on Friday if you're a Muslim, on Friday if you're a Muslim, on Saturday if you were a Jew, on Sunday if you were a Christian. We know that the workers who worked on this structure were free. They were not slaves, though there was some, in certain cases, there was some forced military labor. So everybody got paid. So you see how much the headman of the stonemason's workshop is being paid and how much the others are being paid. We can see that workmen and skilled craftsmen are being gathered from all over the empire to work on this, the most important project of the middle of the 16th century. We also know that the land, this huge area of Constantinople, was, before the building began, of course, the land was purchased from its previous owners. And there was a lot of negotiation and wrangling in court cases in order to enable the Sultan to appropriate, through a legal procedure, this entire urban area that was going to be revitalized. And the idea was that with the transformation of the entire neighborhood, this was going to become the nucleus of a completely revitalized urban area. What were some of the functions that were here? So this is the mosque, and in a bit I'll talk about its architecture and its interior. So the mosque complex with its forecourt and the tomb cemetery in the back, set in a park-like area, so in spatial isolation. And the areas around this the centerpiece of the institutional complex are the various functions. Some of them are income-producing, such as a bathhouse, but many of them are educational and other service institutions. You see that here it says Madrasa number 1, Madrasa number 2, 3, and 4. And these were established to be the leading centers for the study of Islamic law. Why are there 4? Because in Sunni Muslim jurisprudence, you have 4 distinct schools of Islamic legal thinking. So this was going to be the center where all branches of Islamic law were going to be taught at the highest level, sort of the Hastings of Istanbul. Of course, along with the building, they also, the endowment, which is preserved, the document of the endowment is preserved, also endowed money for professorships, scholarships for students, and facilities for them to have their meals. In addition to the law school, that was to be this place that was going to produce the judges bureaucrats and other specialists that were going to staff the Ottoman Empire. People came here from all over the empire to study at the highest level of law. We also have a medical school and a hospital. The hospital was free. They didn't have issues with insurance. The Sultan was paying for it. So it was a medical school and a functioning hospital, in addition to some other supportive buildings, such as a hadith school. So a hadith is the science of the utterances of the Prophet, so Islamic sciences. But from the point of view of empire building, and remember Suleyman the Magnificent reformed the legal system of the Ottoman Empire, so you can see how important it was to have this central, most important, most prestigious legal school attached to his own mosque that bore his name. Today, this is a view of some of these buildings. So the architecture is very uniform, but the subsidiary buildings are respectfully lower than the centerpiece of the mosque. Today, many of these buildings are used for parts of Istanbul University. Now, I want to turn to the architecture of the mosque. So the approach to the building. An Ottoman mosque, at least the canonical formula that we see here, sits in splendid isolation. You do not just enter it from the street. There is this park-like area that creates this void and that sets off the building. Here is a photograph of the same. So we are in the park-like area. We're going to make our way to one of the main entrances, which is here. Then we enter a forecourt and we approach the mosque itself. And so here we are in the forecourt. We approach the mosque. We see how architectural tiles are used very sparingly. In this case, they're calligraphic tiles, very sparingly to mark the architectonic aspects of the building, thresholds, windows, special niches. So from the forecourt, we then enter the main building, and we are in the main building under that enormous dome. So when you look up, this is the summation of Sinan's ambition to recreate and surpass the architectural feats of the architects of the Hagia Sophia. So we have a central dome supported by two half domes and this curtain wall of windows. And each half dome is in turn supported by a number of smaller domes, creating this cascading pyramid of domes effect. The decoration is relatively spare in the interior. There's some decoration through alternating colored stones, some calligraphic flourishes. The calligraphy was especially composed for this building by the chief Islamic theologian attached to the court, the Sheikh al-Islam. But otherwise, the impression is one of sobriety. Even though you have this enormous, overwhelming open space, you also have these little nooks of surprising intimacy. You can sit in the alcove by the window and do your studying or contemplate or think or meet with a friend. So here we are looking at the Qibla Wall, or the wall that indicates the direction of Mecca, usually the most decorated part of the wall. But compared to the practices of other Islamic dynasties, including the Ottomans' arch-enemies, the Safavids, this is very spare. There's very little color. It's very sober. It's very restrained. And here's a colored version of the same. One other feature I want to add, and this comes through in the Suleymaniye Mosque notebooks that have been studied by a number of scholars, including Stefan Gerasimos, the late Stefan Gerasimos. Many parts, building parts, had to be imported from all over the empire. And this reinforced a number of things, including the fact that in the conception of Suleiman and Sinan, this mosque was to be a microcosm of all of the empire. It was built by craftsmen of various kinds of skilled labor, recruited from all over the empire. They were brought in, they worked, they got paid, but also building materials. And so these large porphyry columns that you see here, of which there are, I believe, 8 in the Suleymaniye, they were reused columns from ancient structures. One of the interesting and intriguing features of world architectural history is that sometimes in the history of technology, certain kinds of building techniques are forgotten, certain kinds of technologies cannot be recreated. And in fact, another example of a technology that has been forgotten is seen in the red tile with which I began this lecture. That wonderful tomato red was based on a secret formula that the potters of Iznik had devised. It has a three-dimensional quality, and that formula has not been found. And even though potters today recreate something that resembles that beautiful three-dimensional tomato red, it is not the same. So something similar had taken place here, and so these porphyry columns, or these giant columns, multiple stories high, had to be harvested from ancient buildings because people had lost the technology to make it. The sources tell us that these kinds of columns had been carved by giants in the ancient past. So most of the columns were sourced from classical sites around Istanbul. Obviously, there's a lot of wonderful classical architecture there. But one of them was also sourced from Lebanon. So I feel that Suleymaniye Mosque is ours for many reasons. So this reinforced the idea of this imperial mosque as both the centerpiece and the showcase of Ottoman power, but also as a microcosm of the entire empire. Another interesting feature in Ottoman architecture, and one that Gülru Necipoglu and others have discussed, is the sense of the ordered progression of spaces. So here, the main entrance to the park on the exterior is in the center here, and it's on the axis of the central entrance into the forecourt, which is on the same axis as the fountain in the forecourt, on the same axis as the main entrance, on the same axis as the niche in the Qibla Wall that indicates the direction of Mecca. So this central axis organizes the progression of these spaces. Very ordered, very organized, perfectly balanced, these Ottoman ideals. Also in the same axis, in the back, in the garden cemetery, is the tomb of the ruler, the tomb of Suleiman, built by himself long before he passed away. And here is the tomb of Suleiman, 8-sided, modeled, we are told, after the Dome of the Rock, which is that central Islamic shrine in Jerusalem that is also 8-sided. And slightly off of the axis, but present, is the tomb of Hürrem, Mrs. Suleiman. And that was unheard of. Here it is. Unheard of that a wife would be given a tomb. they should be more modest, or they should be buried with the women of the dynasty. So here is her tomb, not as big as Suleiman's, but present, commemorated. And their two tombs are set in a garden cemetery where many Ottoman officials throughout the centuries were buried, and it was a great honor to be buried in the shadow of the mosque of the ruler. And there's another noteworthy tomb in this complex, and that's off to the side in a little awkward triangular spot where there's a fountain, a public fountain, so a public amenity that was one of the amenities that the complex would offer the citizens of Istanbul. And in here is the tomb of Sinan, the architect. Now, how was this canonical formula of the Ottoman Mosque exported to the provinces? The Office of Imperial Architects had as its task not only to craft the image of rule within the capital, but also to contribute to exporting the image of Ottoman rule to the provinces. And this was done in a number of ways. One example, I already talked about the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, that iconic shrine of Islamic architecture completed in 692, the centerpiece of the Haram al-Sharif, the sacred noble enclosure, where successive Islamic rulers throughout the centuries have added shrines and offerings. Suleiman intervenes on this shrine and transforms it in a very unexpected way. It is very hard for us, we've seen the Dome of the Rock so many times, it is very hard for us to imagine that it was originally not blue. It became blue when Suleiman ordered his potters, his Iznik potters, to move to Jerusalem and create this amazing revetment of tiles for the exterior of the Dome of the Rock. And so this was an exceptional treatment for an exceptional building, so that Suleiman does not transform the footprint of the building, but Suleiman gives it a revetment, completely transforming its appearance and its effect. So here's an example of taking a sacred and ancient shrine of Islam and making it Ottoman. Here's another view of it, and so in the bottom you see the quartered marble dado that dates to the Umayyad period, the 7th century dynasty that first created this shrine, and above it are the tiles that were crafted by Ottoman craftsmen. Now, in addition to transforming certain shrines, the Ottomans also transformed the holiest Islamic shrine, Mecca, as well as Medina. In addition to transforming these highly sacred spaces, they also created new spaces throughout the empire. And the idea was that the Sultan and his family, but also members of the bureaucracy, notable figures in Ottoman affairs, would patronize mosques and other services to the provinces and use them to impose the mark of the Ottoman, the Ottoman sign, onto various cities. So our example of this Ottomanization of the provinces will be Aleppo. Here's a couple of views of Aleppo, located in northern Syria, as you know, on a flat, dry plain. Aleppo is characterized by its most topographically salient feature, The citadel, on which humans have built things since the dawn of humanity. Aleppo is considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. A few other cities compete for that title, but it's safe to say it's pretty old. By the time the Ottomans conquered Aleppo in 1517, early 16th century, Aleppo had a very long history as an important Islamic city, and a city that had been a center for the long-distance trade. It was a stop on the Silk Road, but was also connected to the north-south trade routes, and had in particular very strong connections through its port Alexandretta on the Mediterranean with Mediterranean commercial networks, especially Venice and Genoa. So this aerial view taken in the French colonial period by aerial photography gives you a sense of the landscape of Aleppo. So we have the citadel, and the old city, the ancient city, had been walled in medieval times. So what do the Ottomans do when they come to this city that already has a rich history, of Islamic landmarks? The first Ottoman mosque complex is sited right across from the entrance to the citadel, the most salient feature, topographical feature of the city. And so here we are standing, the photographer, Michel Cochard, is standing on the roof of the Ottoman mosque looking at the citadel. So the mosque is right across from the citadel, and it includes this building, which is a caravanserai or commercial building. So Ottoman mosques are often, I think almost always, going to be part of a network of institutions that either produce income for the charitable and religious functions or offer urban services. So the citadel, in its medieval 13th century glory, opening onto this large open space. Here is another view of the open space at the foot of the citadel and the first Ottoman mosque right here, confronting the most salient building in Aleppo. And this is the Khosrofiya Mosque, a photograph from the Library of Congress from 1937. It was one of the earliest works of Suleyman. So the structure that we're seeing now is earlier than the Suleymaniye. The Suleymaniye is the summation of the canonical style, but here we see the evolution of that style on a smaller basis. We have all the features in this first work of Sinan. We have all the features of the Ottoman mosque. The pencil-shaped minaret. Yes, it's a bit squat. The hemispherical dome covered in lead. Maybe not very elegant, but it is there. The semi-domes, all the outer court, the spatial isolation, the accompanying urban amenities, everything is here. A little dome in the back that is the tomb of the founder. All of those elements are already there. So this is a more modest version of the glory that we're going to see in the Suleymaniye, but ideologically extremely powerful. This is the Ottoman marks that are being imposed on the provincial cities. And here is another view where we see the forecourt and the spatial isolation. In this ground plan, we also see the axis. So this is the caravanserai, that's part of the endowment, the main entrance into the forecourt, main entrance into the shrine itself in the same axis as the niche that indicates the direction of Mecca, the Qibla niche. The tomb of the founder is a little bit off to the side, but the main ideological axis is maintained. And here is another plan from Gülru Necibolu's wonderful book, The Age of Sinan. What are the things on the ideological axis that are so important? We are here, so the axis of main entrance, fountain, entrance to the mosque, and niche. This is the entrance to the mosque. As the first Ottoman-style building being built in the provinces by craftsmen who don't work in this style, there's a number of things that are a bit off here. For example, the awkward combination of this arch and this niche that kind of is not exactly the right size, but they've gotten the important things right. Main entrance, surmounted by a small muqarnas hood. Above the entrance, inscription that names the Sultan and gives the date, and a pious excerpt from the Quran talking about the benefit, the religious duty to build a house for God. So the authority of the Sultan, the authority of religion, mark the entrance to the wall, to the shrine itself. We are in the shrine. In the same axis we have the niche that indicates the direction of Mecca. And here's another view of the niche and a closer view of the niche. So these ideologically crucial elements of the axis, the form, the iconic forms of the Ottoman mosque are successfully reproduced, even though there are some relatively inelegant aspects. The tiles play a role, decorating and marking certain architectural features. These are not Iznik tiles. They were locally made. They are not as good, but they have the same visual repertoire, the flowers, the carnations that the sultans loved, the color scheme. It's part of the same world. This tells us control, consistency, design, centralization. These are the unseen features of Ottoman architecture. By comparison, this is an example of the kind of mosque architecture that would have been normal in Aleppo and throughout the Arab world, a Mamluk mosque from the Mamluk dynasty. This is 1403, not very far from the Khosrofieh mosque that we just saw. And what do we have? We have a facade that sits right on the thoroughfare, right on the street. From the street, you see all the elements that the Mamluk rulers want you to see. Elaborate entrance portal, giant minaret, not pencil-shaped, and a dome, which in Mamluk Islamic architecture indicates always and only a tomb, never the prayer area. So this is a very different visual economy. So imagine you're used to something like this and you see the Ottoman mosque. It's something completely jarring, completely different. A new dynasty has placed their mark on your city. And here are a few modern photographs of this. So the very busy entrance that opens onto a corridor, very different from the visual arrangement of the Ottoman mosque. And soon after the completion of the Khosrofieh, there were a number of other Ottoman-style mosques placed in Aleppo by various Ottoman officials. Husrev Pasha, the one who created the mosque that we just saw, who died in 1544, so maybe a year or so after his mosque was created, was for a while the provincial governor of Aleppo, which was often stepping point onto serving in greater roles like governor of Egypt and serving as one of the viziers on the Imperial Council. He was an interesting guy. He had origins in the child levy again, but was part of a group, a family of people who became very prominent. So his brother, Mustafa Pasha, was also a statesman and a great patron of architecture. His nickname was Deli, which in Turkish or Ottoman Turkish means crazy or quick-tempered. There's a number of these pashas that are called Deli, and it usually means that it refers to their bravery in battle. He's a crazy man in battle. He will throw himself at the enemy. So Husrev Pasha had scored a number of early victories and parlayed that into becoming a statesman, a governor for various places, for various important provinces. So many of the other Ottoman patrons that created Ottoman-style mosques in Aleppo were following a similar kind of career path. Distinguish yourself through bravery in battle or some other great deed, reinforce your public identity as an Ottoman civil servant by creating architectural complexes in important cities of the empire that reflected this Ottoman aesthetic. And by the end of the 16th century in Aleppo, successive Ottoman endowments had created a monumental corridor. This is the Khosrofiya again, the Adliya that we just saw, and Bahramiya later. So a number of institutional complexes centered around an Ottoman-style mosque that transformed the monumental landscape of the city, transformed the skyline of the city, but their supporting institutions, caravanserais, souks, workshops, were all oriented towards strengthening the commercial role of Aleppo, which was, of course, what made Aleppo so important to the imperial center. And the famous bazaars, the covered market of Aleppo, was created around this time. And this is a photo from the 1920s. And an Ottoman traveler, Evliya Çelebi, who visited Aleppo in the 17th century, would say, even in the height of summer, the covered bazaars of Aleppo are as cool as the caves of Baghdad. So here is a photograph from a few years ago of the interior of these covered markets. And in addition, here's an example of a caravanserai, combination motel, warehouse, shopping mall in Ottoman architecture that became, under these Ottoman governors, under their patronage, monumental works of art in and of themselves, with this amazing entrance portal. And these large doors that were large enough to allow animals to come in, pack animals with all of the glories of goods from all over the world that they would bring to Aleppo, where anything could be bought, anything could be sold. It was a magical temple to commercial architecture. And let me zoom ahead to show you this interesting photograph taken from another angle on the monumental corridor, where our eye is led by these Ottoman-style minarets that all surmount various Ottoman mosques along this monumental corridor. So here, Aleppo provides an example of a city that is completely, whose urban core is completely transformed through the mark of the Ottomans. And this did not escape foreign travelers, both Ottoman and non-Ottoman. This is a panorama of the city of Aleppo by Ambrosio Bembo, a Venetian merchant and nobleman who spent several years living in Aleppo. And he also shows these Ottoman-style mosques that are omnipresent in the city, in addition to the ancient 10th century minaret of the Great Mosque of Aleppo. And an Ottoman view by Matrakçı again, maybe you remember him from earlier in the lecture, the Ottoman military draftsman who crafted this very interesting book that is a series of topographic views of the important cities of the empire. And this is Aleppo, the citadel with the moat full of water, and many Ottoman-style mosques that made an Ottoman city an Ottoman city. This formula was reproduced in many other cities of the empire. This is Cairo, the Mosque of Sinan Pasha, 1571. Another interpretation, another version of the Ottoman canonical formula, hemispherical dome, pencil-shaped minaret, forecourt. There are many variations, but the key elements of the formula are there. Kosovo, the Mosque of Sinan Pasha, another Sinan Pasha, 1615, also has these features. Hemispherical dome, pencil-shaped minaret, forecourt, the highly ideological succession of spaces with their inscriptions. Now, I would be remiss talking about Aleppo, not to tell you the modern and contemporary history of Aleppo. This was not too long ago when I was a graduate student doing field work in Aleppo, where you could go and study and meet people and wander through the bazaars and have conversations. But as you know, since 2011, the Syrian civil conflict has claimed lives, has shattered the country, but it has also claimed as its victims architecture. And the Khosraf Pasha Mosque in 2014, around August, was flattened. Sinan's first work. So this is based on State Department data. So here is December 2011, when the war has begun but has not yet reached Aleppo. Here is the citadel with its entrance that had been at the time recently been the subject of a complete conservation by the Aga Khan Development Network, the Aga Khan Program for Historic Cities Revitalization. It had done a wonderful job. This is the Khosrafieh Mosque with its accompanying caravanserai and a medieval madrasa next to it. The data shows by July 14, 2014, the area near the Khosrafieh Mosque, the yellow arrows have been flattened. Khosrafieh still stands, heavily damaged. Other areas have been damaged. But by August 10, 2014, Sinan's first work is no more. And I don't have to tell this audience how precious cultural heritage is and how once something is destroyed, it cannot be recreated. But I do want to remember this quote by a 12th century traveler to Aleppo from North Africa, Ibn Jubayr. And he observed, he was very impressed by Aleppo's ancient layers. And he wrote, "The town is old as eternity, yet new as if it has never ceased to be. O city of wonder, it stays, but its kings depart. They perish, but its ruin is not yet decreed." I'm sorry. I do want to end with a more hopeful note. Is Ottoman architecture still with us today? What has been its lasting legacy? And the last site I want to show you is New York, the Islamic Center, 1991, designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Corporate architects based from Chicago. Corner of 3rd and 96th Street. Does this look to you like an Ottoman-style mosque? Pencil-shaped minaret, hemispherical dome, covered with lead even. We don't have semi-domes, but we have the sense of the cascading minaret. The interior, large open space, and the wonderful dome as if floating on light. And so the legacy of Sinan and Suleyman perhaps continues in the United States. Thank you so much.